My name is Marsha. I'm the founder of Fuckup Nights Toronto. Super excited for our fireside chat tonight with Bruce Linton himself. So before we jump into it, I just want to say a huge thank you to our lead partner, Zero Accounting, who makes all of our events possible, including our virtual events. If you're a small business or you work for a small business and you're looking for an amazing accounting solution, definitely check out Zero, and we're going to post the link in the comments. So today I'm super excited to bring on Bruce Linton. A lot of you who are joining tonight are cannabis enthusiasts, you work in the industry or you're really familiar with the industry, and you definitely know who he is. But for any community members that are joining that maybe aren't as familiar with the industry, Bruce Linton is the founder and the former CEO of Canopy Growth. He's also the co-founder of Rectify, and also the co-chair of Martello Technologies. So Bruce, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Yeah, that was a good intro, but remember how we met?
I do actually. So we met in Ottawa. I love what you said to me. So Fuckup Nights clearly really resonated with you. And you told me that it's basically like therapy and that you just want to lie down and share all of your fuck-ups. So
Well, it's bad because instead I'm in a sun-drenched room, but I remember when I had not heard of the organization, I didn't know of this thing, and I thought I've been saying for a long time, they shouldn't give someone a business award because something succeeds. They should give them a business award usually when something could have failed and didn't, because it was really close to the edge. And then there's almost like the super awards, which you say, well, don't do that again. But this got really close to the edge and fell over. And almost nobody actually gets out and talks about those things. So I give you credit because I heard it for the first time in Ottawa and went, totally think that's terrific.
Yeah, it's a concept that really resonates with people. We always say at our events, if you've never fucked up, or if you're not open to sharing failure, or if you think that you're never gonna fuck up, you're kind of fucking up by default because you're probably playing it too safe. You're not really like putting yourself out there in your business and in your personal life, whatever it may be in your project. You're probably not innovating enough because the most successful people, the most successful companies are truly the ones that kind of fuck up the most because they're taking risks and they're trying new things and they're out there every day just hustling and making it happen, and with that comes fuck up. But I think it's only a failure if you don't learn something from it or if you just keep repeating that same mistake over and over again.
Well, and they're almost like building blocks, right? Like it's been my experience that when you try one thing that you thought was a big idea and it doesn't work, you realize why that wasn't actually the big idea, but it sort of leads you to another big idea.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like if I wasn't wrong about my theory for a company called Clearford, which I worked at really hard for about 3.5, almost 4 years, if I was right about that, I would have never started Tweed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I was wrong then, the advantage of being wrong then is I was essentially enabled to sort of fire myself from being CEO, stay on the board briefly, maybe 6 months, but I had all this time to read stuff and think about it. And so at Clearford, where I was wrong was people in Canada and in England and the US took hundreds of years to move from being in the country to being a majority of the people living in cities. And I thought my analysis was that this was happening much more rapidly in places like China and India. And in fact, places like India, people were arriving so rapidly, they were generating communities where all the infrastructure wasn't in place. And so my thought was, if you could find infrastructure that could be put in place with minimal disruption to communities where people already existed and happened to not use a lot of water, turned out to be an advantage for this infrastructure, you'd probably sign up like a zillion customers right away in municipalities. After working for 3.5 years, I think we had a total of 8 projects or 7 projects or something. And I was wrong that when people arrive in these metropolitan centers in India, they're called unauthorized colonies. What happens is if you put infrastructure under one of 1,000 of these, as a municipality, you now have a huge problem, which is, do you have budget to do 999 more? And so I was fundamentally wrong. And then I had all this free time. So then I started being able to think about other stuff, which led me to cannabis, of course.
That's
And
fantastic.
the sun appears to be blinding me.
It looks fine on our end, but as long as you're comfortable, because we're about to dive into some fuck ups.
Yeah.
So it's 420 today. First of all, happy 420 to everybody who's watching. So you are the CEO of a cannabis company, and I promise I'm going to have some serious questions for you about failure and about your entrepreneurial journey. But since it's 420, I got to ask, how did you kind of establish that culture within the company, and did you ever smoke weed on the job?
So when I started, the principal problem the cannabis sector had was that the people with all of the money that would normally buy equity, well, many of them were potential customers. They were generally not trusting of who was running the things, because they thought the dudes are just going to grow a ton and smoke a ton and there'll be nothing for anybody else. And so when I went around Bay Street, it was really important to establish that I was starting this not because I needed a source of supply, but because I knew there were a lot of potential customers out there. And that what the government really wanted to do was select at least some entities that weren't going to embarrass them. And by that, when I say not embarrass them, they weren't picking companies to grow marijuana. They were picking companies that wouldn't lose it. They were picking companies that wouldn't adulterate it. They were trying to pick leadership teams that understood how to report back to the government on all the considerations they wanted to have reported to them, so they could fill out all the internal stuff governments demand, and that they wouldn't get in trouble having given a license to somebody who couldn't actually do the reporting. And so the logic was, we are all about compliance, we're all about scale. And we like rules, because if there were no rules, we don't have a business. Therefore, if there are more rules, we probably have a better business. And so largely got people to embrace the use of rules as a way to show that we were the ones that should always get more rights first. And largely to accept the fact that bias presented by some offhanded comment doesn't matter. You know, I'd have a journalist that they wouldn't know how to open it, so they would have some kind of little jab or whatever. That bias represented a huge barrier to rational actors, meaning that very many major corporations would not enter the biggest economic opportunity on the planet at the time because of bias. And so we should be happy with bias, because it kept what would otherwise be rational, gigantic competitors away. And so these things start to form a little bit of the culture. One of the reasons I think I got fired is I also believe fundamentally that accountants are wrong in how they keep track of something called a stock option. So everybody who's ever joined any company I'm ever involved with, always 100% of the time, gets granted a portion of that company in a form called an option. And what it says is, I think you have future value. And over the future, we're going to build value, which means I'm going to give you the right to buy some stock at today's price. But you don't get it today. You get it a little bit after, a third after a year, another third after a year, and another third after a year. And if the price goes up from the day you join, the amount you make is the difference between the day you joined and that 1 year, 2 year, and 3 year. And so if we all collaborate and we all work together, I don't care if you're the smartest finance person or the person who's taking the most diligent approach to cleaning. Everybody gets some, not the same amount, but some for everybody. The problem with that is that from an accounting perspective, people think you gave away shares in the value. So an accountant would say that the difference between the $1 price I gave them to you and the $2 price after 1 year is a loss, because I could have sold it at $2 instead of giving it to you at $1. Now that's wrong, because it wouldn't have gotten to $2 if you and I didn't work together and if you weren't aligned with my incentives based on owning stock. And so things like that contribute to having a lot of alignment, but they also contribute to arguments when you get into big capital markets, because according to the way the world's supposed to work, what should only happen is that the, I don't know, top 10 or 20 people, call them 18 guys, 2 ladies, they should get all the prizes. They should get all the stock, and that everybody else shouldn't get any. And I don't find that is a great way to have alignment. But you'll also find at those places, usually whoever runs them has a designated parking spot and a bunch of other nonsense.
Yeah, that's an interesting approach. We'll definitely get into it. And I mean, I think a big part of the reason for what happened is that you were sort of on a different page with how you saw the company growing and how aggressively you were growing it. So take me back to the initial sort of days of when you were starting Canopy Growth. What was your vision for the company? How did you see the opportunity sort of evolving?
Hmm. Um, well, I thought everybody was going to start a marijuana company. My assumption was that in 2013, why wouldn't everybody start a marijuana company? If the government's going to let you have a license to do it, can you spend your time doing anything else that's new and different and potentially more valuable? I didn't understand why everyone didn't start one. But then for at least a year, maybe two, nobody liked it. And so my vision at sometimes I was a little bit concerned that I was either going to be really right or really wrong. And the weird part was most people didn't want to work on this stuff. So we had a bunch of people continuously. The first 3 or 4 people I talked to, I said, I'm thinking of doing this. He says, terrible idea. So, one of the screw ups I made was part of the early criteria of getting a job with me at Tweed was if you'd say yes. Like literally the filter was that you wouldn't turn down the opportunity. And then what happened is in that first, if you looked at the first 20 people, probably fully a third didn't work out very well, maybe half. And then you get a little better and a little better. But as you have momentum, you have selection, you have an option, and you pick a little bit more carefully. But the original point was don't embarrass yourself. Largely, once I began and told everybody I was doing it, my concern was that I would look like an idiot and I do this every time. You go and tell everybody what you're going to do, and then you can't not try and do it because you'd look like a fool. And so I was joking, but I was actually seriously worrying about it, which was it would be very embarrassing to come on your program and say I went bankrupt as a drug dealer. And I said that for a bunch of time, and now I see that there are a number of, including in Canada, cannabis companies which are using essentially bankruptcy protection to sell their assets because they have gone bankrupt as government licensed marijuana dealers, which is quite a remarkable thing.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely no shortage of fuck ups there, and we'll definitely get to it. I'd love some of your thoughts on kind of how the government handled everything, the rollout. But let's stick with your story for now. So that's like what you brought up in terms of hiring. That's a huge theme with Fuck Up Nights. I'd say a third of our stories have to do something with either having the wrong co-founder or just like totally fucking up and how you're hiring and not really placing importance on that culture from day one and kind of just really trying to grow aggressively and hiring, really quickly without really being thoughtful about it at times. So that's interesting that you bring that up as part of the fuck up. Taking us to the point where you've raised billions of dollars for this company, you had a very aggressive growth plan. What did your plan sort of look like, and where was that disconnect with the board?
Yeah, so you need to do a series of things to get through that. But so the second thing, when you're setting up one of these companies, you can actually set up two classes of shares. One where your votes count for more than everybody else's votes, so super voting. In my case, I now know to do that, but I didn't think about doing that when I started this one. So it was a bit of a fuck up in that you can lose a majority position in the company, but it doesn't mean that you couldn't actually control a lot more of the decisions on a vote. And so that was a bit of fuck up. I should have probably done that. And usually it's like a 40-to-1 ratio. But what happens is, as you bring more, as the company gets bigger and bigger, and just to contextualize, right, we Tweed, which started at One Hershey Drive in Smith Falls, which used to be the Hershey Chocolate Factory, in a period of 6 years, maybe 6.25, did 31 acquisitions and 16 financings. And it went from a company that nearly went bankrupt on 2 or 3 occasions because it was such a bad idea in the first couple of years, to one with a market cap Canadian of more than 20 billion. And the final financing I did brought in about 5 billion. In total, we raised almost 6-point-something billion dollars to build something. And the day I left, it had about 3 billion in the bank. Billion with a B, not a million like an M. And So to get fired out of that, well, you would think would be quite an achievement. But what happens is when you get your biggest check, the rules of the game change. So the way I liked to run the company and the way I like to be involved with companies is that I keep a pattern, which is every Monday I have a call with every company I'm involved with. It's set at the same time every Monday, and I don't change my Mondays unless I absolutely have to. And I did the same thing in Canopy. For about 3 years, I had a board meeting every Monday at 9:30 a.m. I said, good God, like you had a board meeting every Monday at 9:30 a.m. Yeah. And I didn't like having a board meeting, but I called one for every Monday. And the reason I did was, well, I didn't like having a board meeting every Monday. And they were pretty good, but it wasn't like the thing you'd wake up and say, I want to do every Monday. The reason I did it is I didn't want to have a board meeting once a month or once a quarter that took 5 hours and slowed the company down because we had to wait until once a month or once a quarter to make a decision. So the only option I had was to have them with more frequency and less duration. And so that's how the company ran. But when the big check came in, one of the only rules and conditions that we couldn't negotiate, like the amount we got went way up, was control of the board. And so if people negotiate a change of control, or I shouldn't say a change of control of the board, what that means is, and I knew this, what it means is there are some things they will want to do that you disagree with. And the way that they're going to achieve them, and you can't stop it, is a vote. But if a vote is required and there are, like the person who's supposed to implement the things doesn't want to do them and you don't have control of the board, the effect is that you now can at any point in time be the solution to you as a problem is firing you. And so you need to know that, but you also need to know that if anybody has a choice, which is for a 6-year-old company to put $5 billion in the bank for 17 or 20% or whatever, or don't do it and keep your job as the founder CEO, you're an idiot.
Yeah.
Your job and not have the money. So the outcome is probably a bit of a fuck up. The process, I didn't keep the voting control, but I and the company got to there because one of the benefits of getting older is trying all these weird new things and keep learning. And so probably I had one fuck up where myself and another guy co-founded a company. We built it up so we had customers like, I don't know, At Home. I think we had Major League Baseball, Playboy, all these as our customers for a web application, which could tell them where their internet wasn't working, what was happening, why objects weren't loading. And then 9/11 occurred. And we didn't react in the way that you should, which is to really cut the size of the company. That was a fuck up. And then the second thing is we had venture capitalists in. And the venture capitalists took over and sold the company, the technology, to Microsoft. But because of the way we structured the deals to start that company, myself and the co-founder made absolutely exactly $0 from the licensing of our technology exclusively into Microsoft from a company we founded about 3 hours after we founded it. So you learn these things by having shit happen. And going.
That's how it goes, I think, as as anybody who's an entrepreneur, it's not like you're only gonna fuck up once. I think they kind of they keep happening, and you have to keep learning from them and hopefully apply them to your next endeavor.
But that fuck up made me have a rule, which is no VCs unless it's the last choice.
Got it. Okay. Well, you raised a ton of money. Like those kinds of numbers are absolutely unheard of. I remember just having to look at it again and make sure that I read billions and not millions when I saw that. So that was fantastic. Of course, you had to agree to those terms. In the back of your mind, did it ever kind of cross your mind that you might find yourself ousted from this company?
Well,
did you feel like your baby was kind of ready to grow without you?
On the day that we signed it, it was my view of it happening. I didn't know when.
Interesting.
8 months, 2 days, and 11 hours later. But it's one of these things where you're doomed if you do and doomed if you don't. Right? Think about the current world we're in. COVID. No capital markets unless you want everything at a 50% discount. and no one buying risk. So now you look at the world and say, how much is cash worth? And it's actually worth more than you paid for it when you got it a year ago, 6 months ago, or 2 years ago. Like, it's worth multiples more now. And so these things are weird because you got to choose which way you get screwed up. And
choose your own adventure, choose your own.
Well, you got to decide, like, am I going to end up potentially out, or am I going to stay in, but the environment isn't as optimal? And that's why now I sleep much better, because those decisions aren't ones that you have to ponder each night. But when you brought up the fucked up thing, part of it is, like, these things don't all turn out great. So you know what happens when you get thrown out? You don't have anything to do, and you get bored, and so you run around trying to find stuff to do. But I would say, like, these fuck ups often, and now I would say I've kind of gotten interested in what I'm doing, they result in really, like, periods where you don't know what to work on. You don't have motivation. You're trying to figure out, like, what is it that is important. And the biggest mistake you can make is to do the next thing so quickly. But I really didn't enjoy probably 3, 4, 5 months after that. And you go around and you smile and you do your stuff. But I think part of the reason I was attracted to your program is to say, bad things happen and you should feel bad for a while.
Yeah, that's a big value. Okay, not feeling bad, but something that we really preach at Fuckup Nights is this idea of failing mindfully. In the tech world, and anybody who's working for a tech startup or a really fast growing company, they hear this term so much, fail fast. And Fuckup Nights is sort of the opposite of that. We're really trying to encourage people to fail mindfully. Of course, there's some fuck ups that just, like, happen quickly. It's an experiment. You learn from it and you move on. But when something big happens, when it's, like, actually, like, a pretty significant failure, or something happens, like, coinciding with your personal life as well, you can't just, like, jump into the next thing. So it's so important to fail mindfully in terms of actually, like, thinking through what happened, and really reflecting on that failure, really taking the time to, like, process it, extract the lessons from it, make sure that you're not kind of repeating those same lessons or kind of going into the next thing while you still haven't sort of recovered from that. And then also from a mental health perspective, it's like, when you go through a huge failure, it's, that takes a toll, and you have to give yourself the right amount of time, and you need a support system, and you really need to kind of give yourself that mental break as well to kind of get through it.
Mm-hmm.
So that
it's sort of living with it, right? Like, I think the one thing, when I listened to your program in Ottawa, when you had the people up there, and the reason I said, man, this feels like something you should just lay down on a couch and describe, it's because that was about 6 months after I'd lived with it and figured out, okay, what was this about? Where's it go? And everybody says, well, you did fine. It's not about doing fine or not. It's about, how am I going to apply the result of this in everything you do next?
Yeah.
So I think you're working through it and be thoughtful. It's not something people should hide, but it's also not something that they should not take time to digest.
Absolutely. So that really brings me to my next point. A big thing that we talk about with Fuckup Nights, aside from business failure and, the numbers and how, that side of the failure looked, your mental health goes so hand in hand with it, and resilience is such a key theme for us as well. I thought you had a really interesting approach with how you kind of dealt with that fuck up, how you sort of absorbed it, and then moved on to the next thing. And I think it's really timely right now, because what we're going through right now, a lot of people are getting fired, a lot of people are getting laid off, and this is outside of their control. But I think, taking those lessons from an entrepreneur who's had to go through something like that, who's gone through periods of time where, you had to be really resilient and find the next opportunity. Tell me a little bit about your approach there, and how you recovered from that situation, how you kind of found yourself in a better spot and onto the next opportunity. And then if you have any advice for people that are kind of dealing with their own fuck up, or just uncertain times right now, like maybe their business is crashing and burning, or they got fired from a job that they loved. Any insights there would be super helpful.
Well, so part of it is you got to try to think like, am I acting in a way that's consistent? And what I mean by that is when I was interviewing Jordan Sinclair, who became sort of the first comms guy at Tweed, I was at a political fundraiser and I said, just come by, have a drink, we'll talk about this. I don't have time to blah, blah, blah. So we went through it and one of the things I said, the answer for the media is always yes. Like even if I accidentally like commit like a triple homicide, you say yes and we do the interview if I can from wherever I am. And the reason is they have a tough job and they're tough people. And so if you selectively disclose to them on your good days, but not your bad days, they make your bad days worse and they make your good days less good. So always say yes. So that's what we did. Like part of the reason people are like, man, you're always in the media. I said, listen, nobody can buy a stock in a company they never heard of, and they can't pick to trust a company to deliver them cannabis. They've never figured out how does that company present itself? So that's why we did the media. So fast forward, when you get fired and you've done the media from CNBC to CNN to Fox to Al Jazeera was in one day. We hosted Al Jazeera. They came to see Canada's marijuana company. When you get fired, you don't say no, you don't disappear, you say yes. And so the press release went across, I think at about, I don't know, 8 o'clock in the morning, probably about 8:05. They call me from CNBC in New York. Bruce, we got a press release that says that you've left the company. I said, well, you always leave the company if you're fired. Like, it's not the sort of thing that says hang around. Come on air. I said, well, sure. I said, I'm back from Costco from getting fuel for my car. I've done all the important things for the day. I'll come on your show. Sure, talk to you. So they put me on right there on my laneway. And I said yes, not because I was looking for something to do, but I had no clue what I was going to do next. And when you disappear, if people think you made some money, they think you've retired or that you did something wrong. I didn't retire and I didn't do something wrong. So I said, sure. And Melissa, somebody said, well, you know, it says that, did you step down? I said, oh no, I did not step down. Well, like maybe stepping down like off the end of a plank. When you walk the plank with the pirates, that's how I stepped down. And I said, no, I was terminated. I read the paper carefully and it said terminated. And I very clearly disclosed that I was terminated and that I hadn't done anything that I was particularly felt bad about. And that routine went on about 11 times that day. And the effect was, out of getting fired, I had over 200 companies reach out to me to say, would you be interested in looking at what we're doing? Had I disappeared that day, which would have been easy. Like when you get fired, it's not like the next morning you wake up and say, shit, I feel like getting up early and doing something fun.
No.
But if you go, oh, I think I'll just take a day or two and relax, the reality is you might as well just disappear. And what I described to you in Ottawa is I said, I think that the way the world works for individuals is they're like kind of like swinging through the jungle. And the job is to grab the next vine and know when to let go of the prior one. Because if you hang on too long, you get stopped in the middle and it's pulled apart a bit. And if you can just see how it turns out badly. And it's quite a bit of luck to keep swinging. But it's like all things, doing a science experiment, the catalyzing energy to get something going is a lot more than the sustaining. And so I didn't want to lose momentum. But I had to explain 10, maybe 11, 12 times that day why I had been terminated, to which I didn't really have an answer provided to me, but I had a theory. And so that was, and you had to do it in a way that was not disparaging, and I had no intent of being disparaging. A, I quite loved the company and the people at it, and B, it didn't reflect well on me if I said anything negative. So the goal of a day like that is simply to elevate the opinion people would have of both entities and be sure that they're separate. So that was kind of like my, how are you liking July so far? Because that is now, I think, the 3rd of July. And the effect was I got very busy looking at things, which meant that I didn't really spend much time looking at me and saying, that's kind of your baby. And my youngest son, who's 17, pointed out something near the beginning. He said, Dad, I think you're going to miss giving people tours of your facility more than anything, which is true, because when you build something that no one's ever seen before and you know everything about where every screw nail's been put, taking people on tours and describing it and showing them the people who work there and telling the folks on the tour what so-and-so does and how long they've been with you. And the whole thing becomes a bunch of electric components and walls and people, and it integrates into something that's just gives you energy to show people. And so, you know, that kind of stuff, it takes a bit for it to soak in, but it makes me sure that what I want to have again is a tangible business where you create something a bit Willy Wonka-ish that people haven't seen before, and you bring them and show them. And if by seeing it, they can copy you and beat you, you didn't build much. And
100%.
so that's kind of like, upon reflection, I really love operating businesses where there are real people, real buildings, and things getting done that people didn't think could get done.
That's such a beautiful outlook. I mean, clearly, you know, you've processed everything that happened, and that's a really great outlook that you have. So that brings me to my next question. If you were to build a company again, whether it's in the cannabis space or something else, how would you do it today? How would you apply those learnings, and would you have done anything differently?
Yeah, because it's sort of weird. Like think of it as building layers. And the first layer in that kind of business is, oh my gosh, you got to grow plants. Kind of makes sense if you're going to sell the result of the plants, but everybody gets excited about the head grower and blah, blah, blah. But before you know it, it's not what you're doing. You're trying to do a layer where you're making the plants change attributes. So now you're doing stuff with geneticists and plant breeding. And then the next thing you know, you're doing things where you're processing it, and the processing turns into extracting it. And before you know it, you're not selling the plant, you're selling milligrams of something that came from the plant. And the key thing is to wake up every day and figure out, where am I in terms of, are we selling plants now? Or are we selling ingredients? Are we selling ingredients, or are we selling finished goods? Like the thing I'm sipping may or may not be a Tweed and tonic. Crystal clear, unbelievable, and a really bad idea 5 or 6 years ago to try and make a beverage that would be delicious, have no calories, no carbohydrates, and take a very small number of milligrams to have an effect. But that's because we went through a process of every day sort of waking ourselves up to say, is the current business model the right one? And so the next thing I do, I'm trying to start at the top and say, what is the highest level of disruption we can achieve in this space? Like, what is the highest, most disruptive outcome that could be possible by taking this action? Like, how are we going to just take over the world from some humongous, super entrenched company, if that's what it is, or change a process entirely? So start there and then work backwards down through all the layers so that you most eagerly work your way up. What I'd say everybody did in the cannabis space is they started by growing a plant, and some people are in clinical trials now to see if elderly people can sleep better with cannabis as a primary insomnia treatment. I can tell you it's a hell of a long way, and it's hard to get there when you haven't got a clue about how you disrupt aged care environments as one of your primary goals, which should be a primary goal of cannabis. Disrupting alcohol should be a primary goal of cannabis. And you can't say disrupting farm or ag. It's disrupting other people's outcomes that people pay a great deal for. So that's things like sleep, that's diminishment of anxiety, it's social lubricants. It is, these are outcomes. So now you have to work back down. I don't know that we certainly didn't do that. And I don't think anybody did that in the cannabis space. They added on. And I think in other spaces I go to, that's the perspective I've learned to for sure seek when I'm doing these.
That's a really fascinating approach, and I think everybody who's tuning in right now, me included, very curious what's going to be next for you. Has the cannabis industry seen all it has from Bruce Linton, or certainly?
No, so I'm pretty busy with it. Like my hat says DNA. So Don and Aaron are out of California. Busy with another company in Toronto Exchange called Slang. In Michigan, Gage Cannabis is the home of Cookies, and they're just probably have the most significant rapid growth of any state in existence. Vireo is in really 7 medical states. They have one other license they don't use. So they're a company I'm involved with, and the reason I like them is the states they're in are all medical, and they're all generally, a lot of them could easily switch to adding rec, which gives a lot of torque. Spending a lot of time on an area of bad governance and bad policy, which is psychedelics. So there's a thing called MindMed, and they're looking at how they basically wean people from things like opioids. They're also looking at various kind of really nasty societal indications that they think they might be able to use psychedelics to assist. So I'm busy with that. I have two funds that are in Europe that are looking for really early stage science that will be intellectual property in principally the cannabis space that will be kind of can't live without it IP for really big companies in 2 or 3 years when they want to enter the space. A couple of software companies, Ruckify is, we all buy crap and we shouldn't. We should basically say, does somebody else have it I can share it with, or can I share my stuff and monetize it and have it insured? So that one was a very good idea leading up to, well, you had a bad day on the 11th of March. I appreciate that was a bad day because on the headline it said COVID pandemic declared and end of 11-year bull run, and you had to figure out about your event. We had people in Austin, Texas getting ready to launch Ruckify, and we brought them back 2 days later. So retrench.
Yeah, I saw that. That's brutal. I'm connected with a few people from Rectify, and I saw that they had to come back. That's tough. And then for us, I'm sure some people watching right now, they were set to go to our 3-year anniversary event, and you could never see something like this coming or happening to your company or to your event, but the decision was kind of obvious, and we had to postpone it. And definitely,
You reacted correctly. You canceled and you shared what you had to pay for. So you put your food to a food bank, to shelter. Good.
Yeah, that was one really good silver lining from that entire situation. The food was all paid for. Definitely a huge loss there, but it was great to be able to donate it to a shelter, and we're excited to hopefully do this event when the time is right. If the time is right, when it's possible to bring people together in that kind of way together again.
But you could have on that occasion, it's a pretty shitty day. You could have just thrown it in the garbage and said, "I'm going home. I've had a bad day." But you didn't. And in the case of Ruckify, we could have said, well, we have an excuse now, we can't succeed. But instead, we had to cut 65% of the total cost of the company. And then we had to stop and think. And then if you stop and think, so well, exactly what's gone on? A whole lot of people have lost their jobs, including the ones we had to lay off. So I guess a recession's probably coming. I think that's true. Probably in one already. When people are in a recession, they have less money to buy stuff. Yep. And if they have stuff, they would like to make money by sharing it because money matters more. So it seems to me like Ruckify should do better as we exit this thing, because if you still need it but can't buy it, you'll Ruckify it. And I'm talking whether it's I want to go for a day on the Lake Ontario and have a paddleboard, or I have a paddleboard and I'd like to have $50 that I wouldn't otherwise have. So I'm going to do that. And so if you pause and say, will I despair or will I revector? The decision can change everything. And so you paused and said, well, I got to make something good out of this. And I suspect most of the people who are listening to this and who are part of your group feel better about an organization that gave it to a food shelter than said, I'm pissed off, went home and let everything to rot.
Yeah, for sure. I would hope so. And it's been interesting shifting to these virtual events. Even tonight, like this was in the calendar for a while, for several months now. This was supposed to be an amazing live event at Shopify. We had some awesome brands that were interested in participating with us, and we were super excited to do this live. But I think this is great, and I'm really happy to be bringing this together as a free event for our community. And now it's not just limited to people in Toronto. I'm sure there's people tuning in from all over the world, from different Fuckup Nights chapters, from across Canada and different parts of the world that can kind of learn from this. So yeah, really, like, you just have to pivot and you have to go with what's happening. You can't be too bitter about it. And I think it's really an opportunity to evolve and kind of bring the community together in a new light.
And when you fuck up, these things happen. Everybody does. They may deny it, but then the real question for me is, you can react, you can overreact. There's always something you do wrong in your reaction, and there's something you do right. And so part of the reason I think it's good to talk about these things is I think maintaining momentum is important, not just hiding away, but also finding times just to live with it, figure it out and say, what am I going to do with this? It's not always what am I going to do different next time. It's more like, what am I working on next? Like, what is this changed my priority or my structure? Like, so your whole thing of your business, you had very little to do with the creation of COVID, to the best of my knowledge, but it has a lot to do with your business ambition.
Yeah, it definitely derailed things, and I think, you know, I'm not the only one in this position. There's so many small business owners. I mean, there's some businesses that are actually that are thriving through this, where it's, you know, the opportunity is there, but a lot are kind of are really struggling. And I think a lot of the tips and the things that you sort of shared are definitely applicable to people that are struggling now. Um,
But I think there's such a demand also right now for anyone who has time to create content that people can watch, that's entertaining, informative, you know, anything that shapes your expectation or gives you a view. And I say that in that I have two sons. One's in first year university, just finished his last exam is today, and the other one's in grade 11. And they're not acting as badly as I am, and they should act worse. And the reason is, one of them was supposed to be going on a very fun get ready for grade 12 trip to do his English credit in Japan, and he'd been looking forward to it. And the other one was selected to be in Fringe Festival and to work at a festival this summer, neither of which have either activity happening. They're done, but they're not freaking out. But what one of them did is he got me watching Joe Exotic and the whole tiger madness. I had to, after the first episode, say, "You're sure those aren't actors? These are people who actually."
it's real. Yeah, I can't believe
He
it.
goes, "It gets crazier." So what he did is, after he got, you know, you got to watch this. One day, he spent an entire day preparing and creating a diversity of characters that he was all of them. And so he put this together and he put it on YouTube. And his name brand that he launched it with is Tom Hanks, HANXXX. You'll understand when you get there. But look at the one which is Joe Exotic, the Tiger King. And then if you say, well, does this guy seem upset that his dream of being 6 shows in the Fringe Festival and working as an 18-year-old at a live theater production for the summer, does he seem like he's handling it terribly? And I think he's handling it well.
Interesting. Okay, well, I think we've really veered off here. We're talking about Tiger King now. Let's bring it back to cannabis and some fuck ups there. So we have some community questions.
Nothing compared to the Tiger King. That guy.
That's a fuck up. That's for a sec. Maybe we'll do a viewing of it with our community. We did one a while ago. It was like a Fire Fest viewing with our community. That was a good time. Maybe we'll do something like that virtually with Tiger King. But I see that we're getting some awesome questions from the community. A reminder, anybody who's watching, feel free to pop your question into the Facebook Live. But I have a few more questions that I kind of wanted to get through as well. So going back to the government rollout of cannabis in Canada, do you think that it was handled well? Are there any fuck ups that sort of jump to mind for you? And let's talk a little bit about how edibles were rolled out as well throughout that.
Yeah, so could there have been a couple of things better? Probably, but given Canada had absolutely no one to copy, and given that it's Canada, so it was interesting because it's a federal decision, not a little state by state thing. They played it first careful, sell what you already know how to make. So they didn't, it wasn't like don't have interesting products. They just said at a federal level, nothing new because we don't need another variable. Just sell what you make. So that meant very limited things, dried cannabis, some kind of basic oils. And then they said to the provinces, do what you want. Well, in Canada, when you say to the provinces, do what you want, they generate half a dozen different ways to do it across the group of them. And what became really evidence was that the private sector did a better job than the public sector, and Alberta represented that. That using stores for e-commerce and delivery made more sense than just walk-up traffic, and that's why Manitoba and Saskatchewan were successful. Now, what I'm impressed with is that other provinces learned from them. So Newfoundland was doing it right at the beginning, but Ontario wasn't, and Ontario is now. And Ontario made it a bad decision, which is we're going to stop cannabis sales at recreational stores. Oh wait, that's a dumb idea, because what we've done is we've normalized cannabis and now we've made it unavailable. I wonder if that assists the illicit market at all. Kind of think so. So that was a fuck up. They undid it, and they basically said now you can actually start to have delivery service and all these sorts of things in Ontario. So I think they did. I would give them like 82% as a grade on doing that because it was 1 year, and they then opened it up to next gen products. And I would say that Canada, again, if I go to Arizona, I can get what looks like a beer can with 100 milligrams of THC. That is a stupid product. So Canada instead said, well, no, we don't need negative headlines because one person drank what looked like one beer and had no productive output for 3 days. They can manage the on-ramp to be not too much, dose low, go slow. And so I think there's plenty of room for ongoing expansion, but I don't see any threat of contraction.
Yeah, I mean, I like what you said, and this was kind of my thought process as well, that, a lot of people were commenting on there's a bunch of fuck ups, obviously, in the way that it rolled out and things went wrong, but it all goes back to the like, there was no one to copy. We were a first mover in it in Canada, and of course, there's no way that it could have gone flawlessly. So yeah, absolutely agree with you there.
Well, what I think is going to be interesting is Ontario has asked the question, how do people feel about consumption lounges? And those who say I don't like them, if I were a landlord or a building owner or anything in that area, I would be super pissed off with them because they're going to happen. And they're not going to be smoke lounges. You can't change the Safe Workplace Act and all these things. What they're going to be are beverage lounges and edibles. And they're going to be very popular because they can have a purpose that's different in the morning. They won't be able to sell alcohol. This will be like a coffee shop becomes a beverage shop after 2, 4, whatever, maybe 4:20. But the effect of that is going to be very disruptive, and it's the next wave. Because if you say how much packaged liquor is sold just so that you can take it home, up until COVID, not that much. How much of it gets, there's a lot, but there's a lot sold, and the way you introduce brands is in bars and restaurants. And so that framework of delivery does not yet exist for cannabis, and it will, and it'll happen unevenly. It'll be a province like Newfoundland that does it before Ontario, but then places copy places, just like Alberta was the best example of how to run retail, and everybody's picked up on it.
Very interesting. Another question that came through. So a lot of people are using cannabis to treat anxiety and depression, but it seems like it's not at the point yet where it's easy to kind of grow it and replicate across the board. So one strain of it one product line of it could be really great, and then another time it can cause paranoia for someone. How close do you think we are to getting it to the point where it is consistent across the board, where you can almost kind of consume it like a Tylenol and know the exact effect that it's going to have on you?
Well, I think it's a lot closer as you get further away from the plant. So to get the identical product or nearly identical product in an extracted form on an ongoing basis is increasingly close or possible. And I think that's when you start to get to what they call APIs, which are essentially the active pharmaceutical ingredients. So you can re-blend everything and make it the same every time, because that is in the interest of the patient, but it's also in the interest of the companies, because then they can say this combination solves primary insomnia. And so I think, we're way closer today than we were yesterday. I think as this year goes on, more of that's going to be published as actual what dosage and combos. But I don't know that the smokable plant necessarily gets there. Everybody says that they can make the identical thing all the time. That's probably somewhat true, but then can you process it identically? Can you package it identically? Is everything and then now you're smoking it. So the ingestion path isn't necessarily, this beverage doesn't necessarily have to go through your gut or your lung. And so there's a question of what are the optimal paths to stabilizing the result the same every time. So optimism should be there, and it should be that within 18 months, everyone will be able to tell someone in their life who said, see, you just use pot because you like it. They'll be actually able to say, no, I use this and it was solving this. And here's the scientific data that says it does assist with anxiety. It does help with sleep. And there's going to be a lot of I told you so's.
Yeah, I think so too. I'm definitely optimistic there as well. There was a question that came through from Caleb. Do you feel the restrictions in marketing have had a heavy impact on Canadian companies' ability to lead this industry from a global perspective, particularly in comparison to the US, who've had a more relaxed approach to marketing restrictions?
Yeah. One of the kind of fuck ups I would give on the first year, and it continues on, is they did this great act. We are actually going to allow adults to have a choice. We're going to charge them appropriately. We're going to try to diminish the illicit market, all these great things. And they did it. They stuck to it. And like in the 11th hour, when they had to decide on packaging, somebody went, oh my God, this can't actually look interesting. It can't look appealing. Like if you look at the medical packaging, it was far more interesting and appealing and brand building than the recreational packaging. So how big of an effect? Well, I think quite a big effect. You could build brands, but they had to be based on companies that were known and visible and repeated in the media, because you couldn't present and build a brand with the way you packaged, and then there were subsequent activities that were so actively disallowed. So I think it is a disservice. I think the other disservice that occurred in Canada is that until this election was over, there wasn't a single person in the senior public service that actually was responsible for foreign activities that I think had a mandate to bring every country in the world here to look at how Canada was doing this cannabis thing. And so the fuck up was, rather than being proud of what we did, they didn't go out and talk about it, and they didn't drag people here. So the standards didn't all adopt the Canadian way, which means we didn't necessarily get the maximum advantage we could have had in all these 30 plus countries that have turned on medical systems. And, it went to the extent where I was supposed to speak about 2 years about now in London to the London, not Ontario, London, England, Chamber of Commerce about how they should run their cannabis program. And I got canceled for speaking about, 3 or 4 weeks before I was supposed to go. And it's because someone at the Canadian Embassy apparently said to the Chamber of Commerce that Canada wasn't really supportive of a pot guy speaking to them about pot. So like that's a fuck up, in that England was creating a program. And while Canada is a good child of England, I suspect England's effect might be different on some countries than Canada's, and we didn't take the maximum opportunity to influence England.
Very interesting. Didn't think about that. There's a question that came through from Felipe. What were your experiences doing business in South America? It looks like Canopy has recently scaled back operations in that region.
I would say it's not the first time. So I've been in telecom, and we did business in South America. We set up businesses here. Establishing for example, so the first place we went in South America was Brazil. That was about 4 years ago. And Brazil is a particularly challenging spot. So that means you're an idiot, right? Let's set up in one of the hardest countries to set up in South America, because you need to have a joint venture. And that's kind of hilarious. You're a pot company, you have to have a joint venture, and you have to have a local partner who represents a majority of the voting shares. So we had to go through all this stuff. And the effect of that was it took a couple of years to get set up in Brazil. We got set up, but we didn't actually get much going. Colombia was much more business welcoming, but they ended up having quite weird rules, in that you could only make an extract and sell the extract where they would buy it, but really domestically, but there was no domestic. It was very challenging. I've always had good experience in Uruguay and in Peru, and again in Chile, and we were invited to participate in Mexico, and I did not attend because I thought I wasn't comfortable personally going to Mexico to tell people that we're going to put their line of business of making and selling cannabis out of business.
Yeah, that would not be.
It was not go to Mr. I like and have gotten to know to not a super great level, but a decent level, a guy named Vincenzo Fox, who surprised the country and was their leader for a period of time. He had a opening at a library or something. He said, Bruce, you got to come and speak at it, and talk about cannabis. I said, I like you, but I'm not going. And then I had a number of inbounds from places like, Panama. They had a quick make something happen scheme. It didn't happen, but we did have, from a business perspective, Some of our earliest, most adventuresome investors were from Panama. I would say Panama is, you used to hear like money being in Cayman Islands or Bermuda or Barbados. It is now in Panama. So if you're starting a business and you need money that actually says, what's next? How do I be first? A lot of that's in Panama.
Very interesting. We have so many great questions coming through. So there's one from Jeff here. What do you think will happen in the US? What do you think is the balance between the economic positive impact of greater cannabis access versus any negative societal issues that may arise from cannabis?
Yeah, it's pretty sad right now because cannabis as an electoral issue at the federal level, particularly for medical, polls very well. But this election now is only going to have one topic, and it sure isn't cannabis, I think. It's going to be COVID happened and it's still happening. Pick me and I'll do a good job, or pick me, I'll do a better job. And I think that's all they're going to argue about. So that's the Fed part. Bad news for states is they're actually in a terrible spot. And so I think because the feds aren't going to talk about it, but the states are screwed, they need new jobs, new taxes, and uses of real estate that is going to be derelict and abandoned. What does marijuana do? It moves into jurisdictions in storefronts and in a factory setting in abandoned assets because they're cheaper. So that helps. We hire people to grow stuff and sell stuff, deliver stuff, transform it. So you have from no ed to PhDs. And taxes are ridiculous on cannabis in the US. So it's the only option they have that hits all three at that level. So I predict that a whole bunch of the states like New York, Maryland, New Jersey's on the bubble of doing it already. They're all going to push hard on making it medical and rec. Pennsylvania. And the reason is they need jobs, taxes, and use of real estate assets. So I think the period between this federal election, which will do nothing, and the next one is going to see a lot more states have clout do it. I think in the context, and I talked to a couple of lobbyists today, I think they might put the Safe Banking Act into this legislative package for the stimulus, so they can say they put it in, but it's so they can take it out. So there's going to be more and more talk around it. It's going to try to appear to be doing something, but they won't do it, but they're not going to kill it for the next sitting.
Yeah, I agree with you there. That's very true. A lot of great questions coming through. From Mark, do you think the beverage rollout has been a fuck up in the cannabis industry, or is it expected that there would be hiccups, and do you think it still has potential in the long run?
I think that most people expected December 17th to be the first day you should ship, which means on December 17th, everybody who is making one should have shipped. To my knowledge, no one shipped. That's a fuck up. And the reason it's a fuck up is, like anything, the first beverage you get, the first cigarette you smoke, the first car you drive, the first university you go to, you end up creating loyalty and creating a standard of comparison by the first one you have. Mm-hmm. And so if you're not first, you can do it. So that was a total fuck up. Getting the packages out and getting it going is terrific. Now the option is, and there's more, and how they promote it and get going. But you always want, like, never ever in a category that's opening up, be anything but the first person out if you want to have first position in market share.
That's so true. Like, that's so applicable in tech as well. Like, I feel like you need to almost kind of be embarrassed of your beta and the first thing that you ship with, but you need to move really fast. And it seems like that kind of applies here as well.
Yeah, so I think that whereas a number of fuck ups, do I think it's the last category stuff? No. So what's going to happen is the tech that created great things like a good beverage is the tech that's going to be creating great medicines. And the dosage that makes a 1.5 milligram have an effect and actually has a an absorption pattern is going to be the same tech that helps people in long-term care. And so the next wave is going to be big medical stories that disrupt whole categories. And then it'll be different rec again. But if you're drawing a picture of a cannabis company, it should be a big box of science with two markets sticking out like horns. One is rec and one is medical, but those aren't actual products. Those are just go-to-market strategies for really good science.
Yeah, very interesting. Um, Great question from Julia C. What's your advice for future cannabis entrepreneurs?
Uh,
And maybe factoring in like the times that we're in, how can any future cannabis entrepreneurs that are still thinking about entering the industry, how can they kind of capitalize on opportunities now and get moving?
well, it depends, a couple things. It depends, like, Julie, do you happen to have a PhD in chemistry? If you do, my answer is very different. But if you don't, because not everybody does, including me, there's a way to, if you just want to be an entrepreneur and you want to have production of flower and sell it, if your overheads are low and your product continues to be differentiated, it makes a huge difference. But that takes dedication. And when I say that, Google cookies cannabis, like COOKIES cannabis. This is a brand that was developed by a musician artist called Berner. But really, what he was is a fascinated person about breeding genetics of cannabis plants. So he did that, and now, if they open a store, people line up for 24 hours to get in. And when they release product, but he was very focused on the plant and then low overheads for a long time. And so I think he can have a business there. Some people can have it at retail. I think retail is going to consolidate way faster than you will see the producers. But you might want to say, like, what's the next wave? The next wave is, these long-term care facilities with all the COVID problems also have a huge overdose drug problem and a whole bunch of drug-on-drug interaction that made the people in there possibly or likely not of the optimal cognitive state and function. And so the COVID problem will go away. The taking a whole bunch of drugs every day and your brain not working when you're 79 years old will continue until cannabis interrupts it. So start looking at it and saying, how do I actually take things to a care platform? How do I become an expert on what grandma and grandpa should have, or mom and dad, as far as not being on 4 or 5 different medicines and using cannabinoids? Because if there's one thing people will pay for, it's the beneficial care of their parents or their grandparents. And so there's probably a space on adopting, just like people learned how to help, you're supposed to go to the hospital and have a baby. The next thing you know, we have midwives and you're supposed to stay home and have a baby. I think the capacity to actually find cannabinoid combinations and work through training, which doesn't really exist yet, to be an expert on alternative care for geriatrics, bet it's a mega growth opportunity.
Definitely sounds like it. Very interesting approach there. Question from Ina. Topicals have recently launched to a much quieter reception compared to edibles and beverages. Why do you think that is?
Sometimes they don't work. So, I have a bunch of scratches on my arm because I've been out smashing around the forest. You have to be careful when you have a scratch because that means your skin's open and you can let germs in, right? That's why you get Band-Aids, you get an ouchie. Your skin's supposed to keep everything out. And so I don't know, in terms of topicals, what the transdermal technology is that has been used so that the actual molecules effectively get into your system. Because if everything you put on your skin went into your system, you'd probably die within a day. So I'm not sure how effective they are, and I'm not sure that given the maybe limited effectiveness of transferring the milligrams into your blood, I'm not sure the dosage is effective. So I think there's a bunch of work around that to be done, and I'm a little skeptical on rubbing a cream on your neck and hoping that something other than ending up with a dirty collar occurs.
That makes sense. Yeah, good answer. Question from Vitor, sorry if I'm saying that wrong. How do you see the cultivation of medical cannabis in Portugal and the market in Europe?
It's a good question. So I think there's going to be places that produce cannabis and there are going to be people who import it, and there are going to be some countries that produce it and don't import it because you don't have to. So right now, I believe Denmark, for example, has cannabis grown but does not wish to import. They only wish to export. And they could do that because WHO and United Nations have a bunch of rules around the transit of cannabis for rec and limit it on medical. That's part. Second part is in Portugal, for a long time, nothing was illegal. It was just decriminalized, which doesn't mean they created the greatest regulators in the world. So if I had a choice to be regulated by a German health ministry or a Portuguese health ministry, I suspect to have trust, the German one has a lot more experience of aggressive regulation. And so when you're trying to move things around, coming from a source of high regulation makes it easier than low regulation. On that basis, I might be more inclined to try and get a license in Spain than Portugal, because Spain has been the source of so many of the poppies. They create poppies, the poppies create alkaloids, the alkaloids get blended and some become opioids. I believe there was a regulatory framework which Spain served most of those products to Europe, Portugal didn't. And don't get me wrong, like if I'm ever actually hiding from society and trying to criminally not go to jail or something, I'm either going to be probably in Porto or Baku. And so it is not an absence of love for the place. I'm just saying those would be the considerations I'd have.
You just gave away your hiding spot. That's funny.
Yeah, good luck finding me in Baku. First off, you got to find Baku.
That's awesome. Question from Julia, unrelated to cannabis. How do you currently prioritize opportunities that come to you? How do you kind of prioritize what you invest your time in?
So in the cannabis space, what I was trying to do is create a portfolio of things that kept me seeing enough perspectives that I didn't miss something. So I was looking for things that were international, things that were deep in one state, things that were multi-state, some things that were rec and some things that were medical. I was looking for animal research, and I was looking for portfolios that saw science projects in universities early. And so I was then, with that objective of having that landscape, then I went through and picked. I liked MindMed because it's in a space that I think is just stupid, right? Like psychedelics are not allowed because they have an effect on your mental state. Well, why? Does they melt your brain or something? No. Well, if you dig in at all, it's just stupid governance, which means there's all kinds of potential that has been masked by bad rules. Sounds like cannabis, but with way more active ingredients. And I'm involved with tech because when I think things make sense, right? So my two tech things, I described Ruckify. If we quit digging holes so we can all get a brand new aluminum ladder or a brand new mix master, you don't have to dig all the ferrous materials out. You don't need all the hydrocarbons. And you know what? You use the stupid things about 1 hour a year, share them, and the planet's way better off. So I kind of like that. And Martello makes stuff like this actually work so that like Skype for Business isn't the most annoying thing ever, or different work from home applications. And I like the space. Then for me, the final part is I don't really like always going to work with anybody I've worked with before. I just want to find people who are interesting. So usually I like to have at least a 3-hour car ride of looking around at stuff with people. And then you decide after the car ride, did I want to get out of the car before 3 hours was up?
I love that. That's such a good, because like, yeah, it's so important. The co-founders that you end up in business with, that's probably like one of the most important things. And I love that approach. Can you handle a 3-hour car ride?
Yeah, go and see stuff in the car. Like the guy from Vireo, he's a doctor. I got him to fly up to Ottawa. I picked him up at the airport. And I had some really important shit to do. Like I had a suitcase with a wheel that made a squeaky sound. So I took it to the place I got the suitcase from to get a new wheel on it. Then we drove out to Smiths Falls to look at a project I'm doing to resuscitate an old post office. But really what I was doing was just seeing whether or not he took an interest in what was going on and how the day went. And if you say, well, I'm going to go in a car and I have a list of questions, it's actually, you should take somebody to get like your suitcase fixed. If they think, what am I doing? Why are you wasting my time? That probably would be a good reason not to work with them.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that approach. Very cool.
Can you see the sign back there that says 420?
I love it. Yeah.
It's signed by a whole bunch of people from Tweed, because 2 years ago, 420 could have turned off because it was established as a method to advocate for better policy around cannabis, and largely that occurred. So you could have just said, well, go away. But we said as well, why don't we actually pick 4 communities that, or pick communities that we put $20 million into over the next 4 years to make them better. And then a group got formed, and then they signed that cool thing, and now I have it in my my room where all the sun comes in.
I love that poster. Very cool. I'm really curious about kind of chatting about psychedelics a little bit. So you seem really optimistic that public perception is gonna change. What do you think that looks like? Like, how long do you think it's gonna take for public opinion to get comfortable with that next thing? Just given that, you know, it did take a while with cannabis, and there is still some stigma around it. Psychedelics are, you know, they're significantly like a level up. What do you think that process is gonna look like?
Well, so to be clear, the target is that they have a therapeutic application, not
Yeah,
recreation.
of course, yeah.
And it's not that I'm opposed to people who want to have psilocybin as a recreational product. What I'm saying is I'm staying focused on the therapeutic effect. So that helps a bit. Second part is no one walks around smoking mushrooms very often and things like that. So there isn't this cannabis. People complain when they smell it. And there's a lot of people who are older who think it means their kid's misbehaving or something because they remember 20 years earlier when they smoked cannabis and the kid was a bad kid and they blamed the wrong thing. So there's always this public positioning with smokable cannabis that used to cause some headaches. Like if they'd have a big trade show and everybody's smoking out in front of the hotel will get a ton of complaints. And then the actually relevant thing is the indications you're working on. So if you're working on indications that result in people diminishing their addiction to opioids, if you're working on conditions that allow a diminishment of suicidal intent because of someone's PTSD or other framework of depression, if you're allowing youth, 20-year-old, to break a super durable, self-harming, deep depressive state using something, people will, as they see the evidence and the results, say thank you, not well, wasn't that once prohibited? No. I think the conversation and the results are going to be that powerful. Like these psychedelics are called psychedelics because they have the capacity to have an effect on how your brain perceives things. What dosage is the optimal amount to really reset things? And so I think the trials you're going to find accelerate quite quickly. There are geographies that make it possible. So if you can't do it in a country, leave the country, right? If Canada says no, well, does Australia say no? Does Switzerland say no? Because if you can go away and get data wins arguments. And so as a simple thing, like if you had sufficient data to prove that XYZ psychedelic and a certain delivery mechanism resulted in the diminishment of a suicidal tendency or depressive state. The reason we have cannabis in Canada is because some people use the court systems and charter challenges effectively. And 400 plus of them, I guess, in 2001, were able to get an established ruling that there was medical benefit and you can't withhold it from Canadians. Well, that logic, I think, will happen in certain psychedelics for certain indications, and certain countries will help get that data.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we'll take just a couple more questions since we're just past that 1 hour mark. Seems like people have a big interest in how it's sort of progressing in Europe in terms of cannabis. So Deepak is asking, can you speak on opportunities in Europe further for the market as a whole?
Yeah. So the bellwether of Europe has been Germany. It has been the most early adopter. It has had a bunch of bumps in the roads trying to get their RFP out for producers and the amount they're producing. But I still think Germany is going to be the #1 place in Europe, in my opinion, to process. So having the ability to convert biomass into extracted API and then put it into platform drugs, I think Europe's going to be a big deal. If you look up in the other corner, places like Denmark are very progressive. They actually have in Denmark a number of entities at a government level that fund cannabis research companies that go out and spend money looking to bring people to Denmark to be in the production business. Where right next door, in think Sweden or Finland, they're kind of not sure. So Denmark's moving, and if I was going to pick any place in that region to study, I would for sure study them. Places that surprise you with being more progressive than you'd expect, like the UK, you can actually, before events didn't happen, the last event I went to in the UK was in a really posh hotel. Can't remember which one, but super posh, all the nice cars up front. And it was a cannabis show put on by an investment bank called Bryan Garnier. And there's this banner on the stair to the rooms where you present that says, it has a crown, how they have the crown for things that are the royal. And it was the agency for cannabis investment in the UK with a crown. If you would have told me 4 years ago, there's going to actually be a bureau that has a crown picture, and it's going to be trying to get people to invest in pot in a UK. I would say zero chance. So the UK
That's
is
surprising.
accelerating. France is still, I think, racially retracting, but it has some early licenses to do research. So I would say, like, check your family connections, check your history, and figure out, can I start in Denmark? That's probably better than starting in Sweden. Switzerland's always a place of interesting stuff, but it's not really the best platform I've seen yet.
Interesting. Okay. Another question that came through, I think this is really relevant to today. How can people experiment with cannabis during these times? Do you find that you're using cannabis now?
Well, yeah, I think this is the perfect time to experiment with it, because you can order it online and have it delivered. You can get it, depending on what province you are, you have a bunch of options to get it. But, I don't even care if you go back to 2015, I think was when we first started selling oils. You know what we told everybody on the phone? Dose low, go slow, right? Everybody, because the worst way for us then to treat a medical patient, which that was the market, was to have them overconsume, because then they would be fearful, and that is not a great medical platform to deal with. And so people right now, it's no longer year one. You don't have to smoke things. You could have had gel caps, which are, I joke, a gel cap is essentially up to 10 milligrams in a cap. So it's the Canadian version of a gummy bear. It just has no arms, no legs, and no head when you eat it. But I would say my recommendation, if you have access to it, start with a beverage. It's prettily socially normal. Drink it and sip it as you might a glass of wine. No faster, no slower.
That's an easy way to transition into it if you're trying for the first time.
Yeah, and you know what? Have one, wait 1 hour, have another. Not more than 3, and don't call me. So like but that to me is a much lighter on ramp than somebody going to get a pre-roll with 27% THC, firing it up and having the neighbors screaming at them, and then getting, there's a lot more accessible on ramps legally, and the beverages available through the legal system are not equal in the illegal system.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really good advice. I think that's a great way to kind of ease into it. And the last question, for those that would like to get in touch with you further or to follow you, what's the best avenue to do so?
So I have a website, brucelinton.com, and to keep life simple, I'm bruce@brucelinton.com. And I don't mind in these times, I have more time for email except Mondays. So if people have stuff, I'm more than happy to try and help them think, because I'm hopeful. I think you're mainly covering Canada. Canada has a really interesting time. Again, a chance to do something different first, because the playing field's changed. Like, believe it or not, America is going to feel a lot more comfortable having a supply chain with stuff coming from Canada than far away. First, they're going to want it in America. Second, it can be in Canada. Third, maybe Mexico or somewhere else. So we have this really scared big neighbor to the south who's not sure what to do. We're pretty smart, and I'd love to talk to people who are trying to figure out how they help the world shorten supply chains. And don't get me as like some nationalist. I'm just saying reality.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for offering that up and being so open and willing to chat with people in our community. I'm sure a lot of people are gonna take advantage of that and reach out, maybe share some of their own fuck ups to break the ice, since you heard your story. Shout out from my team. It looks like my team has discovered your son's YouTube channel. They're loving it. Shout out to your son. Looks like that's a lot of fun.
I gotta say, the Dr. Zeus one starts crossing some lines that people might not like, but I think it's hilarious as well.
That's awesome.
Who knew that you could critique Dr. Seuss in such a way?
Yeah, you never know. Now's the time to experiment with that too, I guess. Bruce, thank you so much for joining us tonight and sharing your story, sharing your fuck ups, and sharing your outlook. I'm sure people really enjoyed this, and we had such great questions. Thanks so much to everybody that participated tonight. But really, Bruce, thank you too for taking the time to chat with our community and to be so open.
Well, you're welcome and good luck with your business, right? These are uncertain times and you're doing a good job of keeping it out there and making things still move, but it's not getting easier. So keep pushing the rock.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I truly, I appreciate our lead partner, Zero, really supporting us through this time and just being an amazing partner. Every sense of the word. Again, if anybody here is looking for an accounting solution for small to medium-sized business, definitely check it out. For anybody that has been to our events in person, if you're missing our fuck up wall, which is where you can write down your fuck up anonymously, don't worry, that's available virtually to you as well. We've brought that to Facebook, or sorry, I should say to Instagram. So follow at fuck up wall. Very simple. It was like this thing was made for Instagram. We just have squares of post-its. You can submit your fuck up anonymously there, or you can DM it to us, or you can just lurk and see other people's fuck ups. And yeah, really looking forward to seeing you at our next event. We're going to be announcing more of these fireside chats.